Welcome to Diving Deeper Discussions. I'm your host, Randy Isaac, and I'm here to represent the American Scientific Affiliation, and we have our focus on the current issue of Perspectives on Science and Christian Faith, edited by Jim Peterson. And what we are delighted on our focus on the December 2021 issue to focus on the lead article, which is titled Pronuclear Environmentalists, An Introduction to Eco-Modernism, written by Terry Gray. And we're delighted to have Terry with us. Welcome, Terry. Yeah, we see you.
Good morning, everyone.
There you go. Many of you know Terry very well, and you know that he joined ASA in the mid-90s, and he's really the one who spearheaded the establishment of the ASA website and continues to be a major factor in that. But you may not know a little bit more of him. So Terry, let's chat a little bit about who you really are. Well, where were you born and raised?
I grew up in rural Indiana, and really was a country boy. My dad was not a farmer per se, but we had 10 acres, and he kind of played farmer. He was a banker, so that was the environment I grew up in. Went to Purdue University for my undergraduate work, so stayed in Indiana, and then school.
What was your major there at Purdue?
That's an interesting question given the topic today. And given my history, I was a molecular biologist as an undergraduate, almost a double major in chemistry, but there were a few courses that I avoided a little bit. My career, my graduate work was at University of Oregon, and it was also in molecular biology, and they just put me in molecular biology because that's what my undergraduate degree was in.
Why'd you go all the way to Oregon? There's some good schools out in the Midwest.
I had pretty focused interests already in protein crystallography. You'll wonder why I'm talking about nuclear power.
Yeah, we are.
Given my background there, but I was interested in as an undergraduate in protein structure, protein folding, and applied to 3 grad schools that had people who were sort of prominent in that field, and ended up with Oregon as the choice in the lab of Brian Matthews.
Oh, that's great. So, but you came back to the Midwest for a job, is that right?
Yep. So I, took 5 years and then a year postdoc for my PhD at Oregon. And then, there was a draw for family for both me and my wife, Sherry, and whose families were still here in the Midwest Indiana area. So I ended up at Calvin College in a temporary, was filling a sabbatical leave for someone, and then that turned into a regular appointment, and I was there at Calvin for 10 years in the chemistry department, and sort of with my contributions, I think, in part, it turned into the chemistry and biochemistry department. And I've sort of been in chemistry departments ever since. So
excellent. All right. So you're in Fort Collins now and have been for a long time. That's really cool. So your interests, I know you've written a number of chapters and various books, and as a molecular biologist, that's been your focus, as you said. And you mentioned how you got into the environmentalism. Can you expound on that a little bit more, and then move into how this particular article came about?
Yeah. Okay. So, when I came to Oregon, when I left Calvin and came to Colorado State, I came as a staff scientist. more or less expert in computers who had a PhD in the disciplines, in the sciences, and so I was computer support scientist here, and so kind of out of teaching for about a decade, maybe a little longer than a decade, but supporting the department and the teaching arm of the department here with the computer needs. And so I kind of joke at Calvin, my research there was I continued some of my protein structure work, but I couldn't get crystals of the proteins that I was studying, so I could do the structural analysis that I normally do. So I turned to computational methods to do that, and so that's how I sort of moved into the computational science side of things. So anyway, that position kind of disappeared, and I turned to undergraduate teaching in the chemistry department here at Colorado State, teaching mostly undergraduate chemistry. And I taught a non-majors course. I've been doing that for about 10 years, and we had that course sort of, there was a biochemistry. I taught 5 years of majors chemistry in the first 6 weeks of the course to capture the interest of these people who would be interested in the bio side of chemistry. But then the other piece of the course was a more energy and environment side of chemistry. And so that's how I got into this. And, there was a chapter unit on nuclear power. And so, teaching this undergraduate non-majors course is what sort of drew me into this area. So I'll confess at the out front, I'm very much not a professional research expert in.
You put the pen to the paper, so we'll assume you're the expert. But this particular article, I mean, did Jim beg you on bended knee to write something, or did you beg him to do it, or why did you write this article?
I don't know if there was any begging involved, and maybe Jim can report on this. But at some point there was a plan to have an issue of the journal that focused on nuclear energy, and there was a call for papers, and in the end that I think didn't pan out as the way it was originally planned. But I had offered to do this little piece on what I thought was an interesting perspective, the sort of pro-nuclear environmentalists that I had run into because of my teaching. And so I thought, well, I could write something there that might round out what the journal is going to cover when it talks about nuclear power, and provide a pro-nuclear perspective from a Christian perspective.
Well, I really appreciate it. I thought your article was particularly well written, and I thank you for putting it in here. Reading your article was the first time I'd heard of Eco-Modernism. I'd heard of the pro-nuclear environmentalist kind of thing, but for those in the audience who haven't heard of it before either, can you just tell just briefly what you put in the article about what Eco-Modernism is, when it started, and how it came about?
Yeah, so I usually attribute Eco-Modernism and that idea to and associate it with what's called the Breakthrough Institute, which was a group of environmentalists who, and this is kind of the gist of why nuclear has become important, and some environmentalists who think that the really pressing problem of our day and our age is carbon dioxide emissions due to the burning of fossil fuels. And in the United States, for example, 70% of our energy use, comes from that source. As loud as the alternate energies and renewable energies world has become, we're still at 70% fossil fuels. And, when I was sort of early in my career growing up, the resistance to fossil fuels was because we were going to run out. But now there's really no fears of running out in the next century or two in many respects. And the concern is, carbon dioxide and the emission of carbon dioxide and the effect on the climate and the atmospheric temperatures and so on that carbon dioxide contributes. And so this group, these eco-modernists, they have many, many other concerns, but one of the concerns is that, we're going to keep meeting the demands of the modern world and a growing population of people. We need energy, and that we've got to move away from fossil fuel-based energy. And so they latched on to nuclear as a possible significant contributor.
Yeah. So the name, who coined the name Eco-Modernism? I mean, it's as if everybody else is ancient, or the other environmentalists aren't up with the modern world, or what's the name all about?
I think that's I've never thought to ask that question in exactly that way, but in the article I refer to this sort of back to the garden, back to nature, cutting back on technology approach that some environmentalists take. And the eco-modernist movement recognizes, number one, a growing human population that's probably going to get up to 9 or 10 billion before it tops off. And, that's a very interesting, serious problem. How do we support that large population on planet Earth? The industrialization, if you will, of agriculture that has led to more and more people getting to the cities and finding their life and world and vocation and in city life and industrial life, and fewer people needing to do the farming work that supports that group of people.
So you're not looking to reverse that trend. You're looking to recognize it as a given, right. And how do you cope with it? Okay.
And in fact, and this might be an area of interest for this conversation, to as the human population and economy, if you will, focuses on city life and concentrates in cities, and we can use sort of modern agricultural techniques to feed that world. That leaves more space for what they call wilding, and so we might think there's more and more space being devoted to agriculture, but actually that's not quite true because of the improved agricultural methods. The space requirements are growing less and less, and that can be devoted to nature.
Right. Okay. There's a lot to discuss here, but I want to get to the microphones and let our audience here jump in and agree or disagree or see what we can do. So, Vicki, if you could enable people to unmute themselves As usual, we will start with those who submitted questions in advance. And the first person to do so was Del Kuhn. You've got a good track record, Del. I think you've asked the question in almost every session. But anyway, good to see you again. And go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Randy, and thank you, Terry. And these sessions are making me read the journal in detail instead of just turn the pages in it. So I really appreciate them.
That's what it's supposed to do.
Okay, my interest is really in nuclear energy. And Terry, look for any insights you've got. I'm in favor of it as probably a better green solution than solar and wind for some of the reasons you mentioned in your article, mainly the large scale footprint. And each of those projects is going to have its own environmental impact. And I just don't see that going forward. First, as a intermittent source, we still have to solve the problem of energy storage, wind turbines kill birds, and so forth. So when we're saying, yes, nuclear has challenges, all the rest of them do too. And it's ultimately going to be a political decision, and thinking about where power plants are going to be built in the next decades to century. We've got a range from the developed countries with large active environmental movements, where we're going to be replacing existing plants. Maybe think Germany and France as the opposite ends of that spectrum. We've also got undeveloped countries, think Africa, that really need to get affordable, reliable power to just bring themselves up, hopefully, to the developed world. So I realize that just because we might have the same goals and means as the Ecomodernists, that doesn't mean we have the same motivation for action as they do. So just because they've got a manifesto doesn't scare me away from it. So do you have any insight as to where nuclear power is likely to be built and used in the next century? I'm also assuming Randy gave you a copy of the question, so this isn't coming across.
Yes, I did.
No. I did see them, and thank you for that and for all those comments, and really for drawing us in a way to the focus on nuclear power. The U.S. has gone from just over 100 nuclear power plants to just over 90. Here, even in the past few years, there's great resistance in the United States, and you mentioned Germany and other parts of the world to nuclear power, and we can talk about why that might be. But France has been a leader, although there's critics in France. They don't have as many power plants as we do, but they fully embraced it. 80% of their energy production is from nuclear. But Germany is cutting back. United States is turning off power plants. But China is soon going to surpass the United States as being the leader in the number of active nuclear power plants. And so in many parts of the world, there's a recognition that that's the way to go. The question of intermittency, and while this is actively debated in the energy world, some people say yes, we can do it with all renewables, wind and solar primarily, and others say no, we can't. And there's that active debate, and that's especially in the United States and parts of Europe. So I had a conversation a couple of years ago with one of our at Colorado State, one of the people involved with our Energy Institute, and what about nuclear? Why don't you talk about nuclear? He was all about transitioning to natural gas as a more and renewables as more eco-friendly. And he said there's just so much political resistance and social resistance to nuclear that it's not even on the table. Now that was 5 years ago or so. I think, at least on my Facebook and web and Twitter feed, the Department of Energy's discussions of nuclear power are much more positive and moving in the direction that hasn't turned the tide yet in the United States, where we're getting more plants. But the discussion of small modular nuclear and those kinds of sources is becoming more and more prevalent.
All right, we can get back to these topics some more. We want to give more people opportunity. Let me just remind everyone, if you have something to say, you want to ask a question or make a comment, just go to the reaction icon at the bottom of your screen, click on that, and then you'll have the option to activate the raise hand, and then I will call you in the order in which you raise your hand, and then you can talk. But let's keep our comments and questions concise and give as many people a chance to talk as could be. So the next person to raise their hand was Bob Geddes. Good to see you again, Bob. What would you have to say?
Thanks very much, and thanks, Terry, for your article. We're currently at our Lake Huron cottage, and just 35 kilometers to the north of us is the Bruce nuclear development, and it's apparently the largest nuclear power station in the world. And it and other aspects of the industry are jointly working together to establish a deep geological repository for the high-level nuclear waste. And there's one unit right in our area, which is 700 meters deep, very solid, impermeable limestone, which seems to me to be ideal. However, it is not getting any public support at all because it's simply too close. Even though 200 meters to the higher up is and in the same area is a salt mine, which has been working out under Lake Huron since 1959, and it's not causing any problems. Anyway, we run into this nuclear dread situation, and I personally just don't know what to do about it. And maybe as an extension, as I've been thinking about it, I run into the same thing with discussions with young Earth creationists. Like it's the same kind of dread almost to discuss anything else. So, Terry, you've already alluded to some of it, but how can we work with this? Because it is a factor that just prevents any kind of discussion.
Yeah, that's a great question and a great observation. You know, in the United States, we had the location in Nevada that was going to have store nuclear waste, and that project has been largely canceled under the Obama administration and the science and energy folks there. You know, thinking that there's better things to do with nuclear waste than, bury it in the ground. That the technology is changing in such a way that breeder reactor type technology might allow the use of that material, and we shouldn't just bury it. What's left when you do have nuclear waste at the end of a nuclear power plant, use of that material, there's still a lot of fissionable material left. This public perception is, I think, a big problem in the U.S., and it's caused in part by, some scientific attitudes and the energy professionals' attitudes. Claims that we can do everything with renewables, which are out there, And, there's people who doubt that and resist that, but at the same time, we have that. So my colleague who spoke a few years ago said, well, it doesn't matter if nuclear is better or that there are real solutions. There's just a political impasse in the United States, and that, if people can vote down whether a nuclear power plant gets built or whether we have some kind of solution to the nuclear waste problem, what are we going to do with that? I think, education and, convincing people otherwise is probably the way to go. And as we all know, that's a slow, tedious road.
There's no magic bullet, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
And if I could I appreciate Joe's response about nuclear waste in the salt mine, and I quite agree. And that wasn't my point. My point was that if people are worried about that whatever material is stored 700 meters deep is going to leak into Lake Huron, which is totally worth protecting, you try and show that a material takes 1 million years to travel a meter in this material, and that doesn't seem to make
it doesn't matter. No. Scientific facts don't seem to matter, and we scientists aren't exactly expert in knowing how to influence public attitudes. So it's a challenge. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Tal van der Graaf, I think you've had your hand up a while. We'll give you a chance. Yes?
Thank you. First of all, Terry, thanks very much for publishing the article. I found it very, very interesting and comforting, to say the least. I could probably spend an hour discussing or responding to your article. I think that, yes, I think nuclear power is absolutely necessary if we want to keep our standard of life the way what we have now, and if we want to have any impact on the reduction of greenhouse gases. There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever. As to disposal of waste, I worked in the nuclear industry for 35 years, 25 years of which was dealing with high-level waste studies. I was in Yucca Mountain in the mine, and people that say that waste disposal is not being done are incorrect, because the Finns are disposing of high-level waste in Olkiluoto on the south east coast of Finland, and the U.S. has been disposing of transuranic waste in the Whipsite in the salt bed near Carlsbad, New Mexico, for at least 10 years. So it's being done. It's not a matter that things are not being done. The waste is being disposed of. Plans are underway, etc. I am familiar with with Bob's mentioned the site near the Teeswater, but I'm also aware of a proposal by I think Bruce Power to put waste on near Lake Huron of low and intermediate level waste, and that was defeated not because of scientific reasons, but because the First Nations people objected to it. So we have to deal with that as well. What I think is missing is the urgency of this. We are going to have to deal with it, and we cannot forever keep spinning our wheels. Natural gas is not the answer. It's an intermediate answer. And yes, if you have coal, then natural gas looks good. If you have nuclear, natural gas looks bad from a greenhouse gas emission point of view. So yes, it has to be done, and it has to be done very soon. And as far as the dangers associated with nuclear power, there isn't any. Let's face it. I saw an OECD study a number of years ago that plotted that gave the number of fatalities based on energy produced. And what was the most dangerous? Coal. What was the most dangerous? Hydro dams, especially the dams that collapsed in China. What was the lowest? Nuclear power. So that has to be brought out as well. If there's one thing I have to, I'm concerned about, Terry, about your article about the environmental program, is trying to put people into large cities. And I wonder what that would do to their mental health. If you go to Hong Kong, for example, it's cheap to chow off high-rise apartment buildings. And I wonder how that would work in a society where we are, where we like to have some green space around ourselves. That is a concern of mine, and I would like to have them rethink that. As far as nuclear power goes, yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Terry, let's keep our comments short here. Terry, any comment on that?
Well, I mentioned this in the article, and I don't want to at all minimize the nuclear waste problem, but in the U.S. at least, all of the nuclear waste can be put on a football field. About a few meters deep. If we put all of the nuclear waste in one place, in my mind, that's a strikingly small amount of material that we're dealing with. And so, what's the right way to manage it? Central repository, keeping it on site like it's currently done now for the most part. Having options that use that in different ways is are up for debate and discussion. And then there are all sorts of interesting securities and safety questions around that involve malicious parties who might get their hands on the waste in some way.
Okay.
So that's one response. The big question that was raised, I think the urbanization of the human race is a foregone conclusion. I have these numbers in the article, but I think within a couple of decades, the whole human population is 75% of the human population will be living in urban areas. And there's just, I don't think there's a meaningful way to reverse that trend. And in terms of footprint on the Earth, I think that's something to recognize. How do we, for mental health issues and our own engagement and appreciation of nature, how do we as urbanites do that, and where do we do that? I think that's a social problem that needs some thought. But I think to say we're going to end up, we need to drive the human population to a more rural environment. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Reversing the trends are tough. Okay, we need to move on. Let's want to make sure everyone's got a chance to say something. Bob, it's great to see you with us. Bob Kaida.
Wonderful to join everybody. And to Terry, thanks very much. In truth and advertising, I just have to say mea culpa in terms of motivating the idea of having an energy issue. And I think that the one thing that's a real challenge is that, if I could speak frankly, and I don't want to offend anybody on the call, the kind of discussion that we're having right now is something that I participated in and been a part of from, for example, the American Nuclear Society. And I really see very little difference from the kind of talk we're having with the professional associations I've had in 40 years of my experience in fusion research. But what I was trying to get the conversation going about is, from a Christian perspective, to be humble and self-critical. Because in fusion, then the butt end of jokes saying fusion is the energy source of the future, always has been and always will be. But then what it does is that because of its difficulty, we have a great incentive to then, if you will, not make the same mistakes of what I call hubris, of going ahead and not advocating nuclear energy blindly, but saying, as a Christian, let's show some humility in looking at these alternatives, whether it be compact reactors, the waste problem, or whatever. And from that perspective of humility, use that from the Christian perspective to go ahead and, if you will, win over people. I didn't get many contributions, frankly, that followed along these kinds of lines that I wanted to get going, and that's what it is. But just a thought, more a comment, that, you know, when we say, how do we convince people? As Christians, perhaps we can introduce a little bit of what I call humility in the way we approach things, including humility in ourselves and what we're limited in our understanding and capable of.
Terry, any comment?
Yeah, I think that's a great comment, and you know, I don't know, I may have come across overly optimistic and supportive. I gave an answer to the nuclear waste problem, but you know, I think that is something that we need to worry about and deal with properly. I think the question of nuclear weapons and the connection of nuclear energy with nuclear weapons is one that, you know, I kind of danced around in the article a little bit, you know, and it sort of becomes a prior, you know, what's the higher priority? You know, the avoidance of bad actors who might use this technology in a bad way, or you know, figuring out solutions to our energy and CO2 story and issues.
Well, Terry, go ahead, Bob.
Yeah. No, I was just saying, and that's what I call the Christian perspective. Yeah. Thanks, Terry, for a great article.
But since you brought it up, Terry, what could you just comment very briefly on the distinction between the radioactive characteristics of weapons grade material versus that for nuclear power reactors? Are they close enough that this is a huge danger? Or is there still significant change in density and concentration requirements?
Yeah, so hearing from the crowd, there are probably experts in the audience, much greater than I. My understanding is that, and we're sort of experiencing this with what's going on in Iran today. Is that, yes, there's sort of a capability when you have nuclear power that you can begin the process of developing nuclear weapons, but that involves significant technologies to enrich the fuel, to make the fissile material more concentrated, and that's where the world, I think, has focused on trying to stop nuclear weapons proliferation.
Okay.
So, right. What the energy issues are a necessary precursor, but there's much more that needs
still
to be
done. Big gulf. I think that's the key point. Yeah. Okay. So, Jim Bradley, I see over here. Okay. You're next.
Sure. Hi. Thanks. So, Terry, we've already talked a little bit about the safety issue, but I wonder if you talked about some in your paper too, but I wonder if you could go a little bit further and say a little bit more about why you think these smaller, more compact reactors would be safer than the large ones.
Yeah, I'm not sure safety is. I think there are safety issues that have been taken into account in the the small nuclear modular nuclear reactor. The main thing that I think is the advantage there has to do with the scalability and the fact that you can sort of factory produce, mass produce these small reactors compared to, at least the way in the United States nuclear reactors have been developed on a custom per site basis. I'm actually, if I had to choose, I wouldn't choose water-cooled nuclear reactors as the safest solution, although that's what is present in the small nuclear reactor space. I look for technologies that aren't fully developed yet that have other than water-based cooling that can lead to the kinds of accidents that we've seen in the past. But I don't know that I have a distinct answer to your question. Maybe somebody else who has some more experience with the safety issues of a small nuclear.
Okay, so if we have someone like that, please raise your hand and get in the queue. Thank you, Jim. Kirk.
Yes, there I am. Yeah, Terry, you mentioned the small reactors in your article, as you were just discussing. I wondered if you have any thoughts about some of the other fission technologies that people are talking about. Thorium reactors. India is doing a lot of research on those because they have a lot of thorium, and also in my community in accelerators, there's some talk about what they call ADSRs, accelerator-driven subcritical reactors. And sometimes those are combined with thorium reactors in the discussions. I wondered if you had any thoughts about those technologies or any other new technologies on the horizon.
I'm going to say yes to all of the above. I mention a few in the article. And that list is growing in terms of other technologies. I put a plug in for that. It's now a decade old, but Pandora's Promise, the video that I referred to at the beginning of the article, is the quintessential discussion of pro-nuclear environmentalists. But there's a clip in there, and you can find that clip on the internet of a reactor that was being developed at the end of the previous century, if I can put it that way, in the late 90s and early 2000s, and that project actually got canceled in the politics of the day. And there's just all sorts of technologies that are being developed that have potential to be safer and cheaper. I think in the United States, the bringing out of nuclear power plants has been like a one-off thing. Every instantiation is different, and I think that's been the big problem for us. We need to be able to standardize and mass produce good and safe technologies to have the kind of rollout that we need to replace our fossil fuel-based electricity production.
Well, that's one of the ongoing challenges of research management here, isn't it? Because on one hand, you want to explore every possible avenue that's been raised. On the other hand, you don't have enough funding or people to pursue everyone or to enable them all to succeed. You have to do some selection. That's not easy. Okay. Thank you, David Larrabee. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you, Terry, for your article. I enjoyed it. I have one question that this wasn't raised explicitly in the article, and that is that of timescale. If we were to proceed along the nuclear path with due diligence and careful design and all the things that we pray those involved would have, is the development and implementation going to be in time for us to say meet the to get our emissions reductions down in the timescale that's necessary, as opposed to a long-range solution?
Yeah, I guess, this is opening a can of worms. What time scale do you believe? We've talked about, there's this 10-year window that people are talking about. There's if you look at the energy data that the U.S. government puts out, we're still doing fossil fuels 50 years from now, and moving gradually away from that. But so if you, I tend to be fairly moderate with respect to that question, and so if we're talking about some nuclear solutions that can roll out in the next decade or two in a good and useful way, I think we have room for that. I'm also, in my course, I talk about these carbon capture technologies that enable us to mitigate CO2 using other methods than switching the energy source. So, if you're more of an alarmist on the CO2 issue, and say we only have 10 years left, that's a problem that I'm not really entertaining.
Okay.
So
fair enough. Yeah, timescales are tough. Paul Arvidsson, good to see you. Unmute yourself, please. We can't hear you. There you
Okay, here we go. Sorry. So, Terry, good to see you again, old friend. This is great fellowship. This is we'll have to do for fellowship for now. Yeah, I, as you know, I helped to read the early editions of the journal, the ASA journal, and I remember that many years ago there was a forum, a discussion on nuclear power among ASA people at that time. It was several decades ago. I think the general consensus was favorable to nuclear power then, and this was back before Chernobyl, before Fukushima. But I think those events kind of soured me on the prospects. And also the fact that it was this cumulating lack of an end game for nuclear waste. That a lot of money was put into the Yucca Flats project, and then it was shut down. And I think not entirely for scientific reasons, but you will remember that the Senate Majority Leader at the time was Harry Reid, who comes from Nevada. So there's this not in my backyard factor that always comes in. So this leaves me really ambivalent about it. Maybe these small reactors have something new to offer, but always when we're thinking about energy, we know that, as a physicist, everything is about energy. And so there's alternatives. There's all kinds of alternative energy. Right down the road from you is the Rocky Mountain Institute that has been showing the value of solar alternatives and how the cost of solar has been decreasing greatly over the years, while the cost of nuclear power has not decreased. In fact, it's getting higher to the point where we're not building any more big reactors in this country anymore. They're just not profitable enough. So those cost factors come up, but I just want to wrap it up by commenting on Bob Keita's comment about humility. And I think that, it reminds me of the story about the little story that Tolstoy wrote about how much land does a man need? And I'm asking, how much energy do we need? I'm sitting here at my comfortable desktop with a heater because I'm in my basement, and I'm running 168 watts on my computer right now. If we could cut the power needs in half or more, how much would we need? There's, the sun puts out 1,000 watts per square meter on a clear day. So how much do we need beyond that? I'm thinking maybe we need to take a Bob Kaita's approach and think about shrinking our footprint first, efficiency first, living on a minimal basis first, then deal with adding more. That's basically my comment.
Terry?
Yeah, Paul, thanks a lot for those comments. I'm when I look at things, I see that the long-term future is going to be nuclear. That the land footprint of wind and solar is just too much. Now, that's an opinion, and we can debate that. But I see the development of alternatives today and renewables today as being sort of a temporary fix. That the long-term solution is going to be in an ever increasing energy density solution, and wind and solar are not ever increasing energy dense. So anyway, I mean, I think there's probably a lot of people who would disagree with me on that. With respect to your question about shrinking, the Western world's energy use over the last decade or two is kind of flat, and largely due to we're doing more and more and more things. But we are doing it more and more efficiently.
That's per capita, right?
But it's yeah. I mean, some kind of metric on the U.S., for example, as a nation, the energy use is relatively flat overall over the last decade or two. Just one. I don't know if it's a fun statistic or not, but 0.5% of the world's electricity use goes to Bitcoin mining and the computer power behind Bitcoin. Yes, or at least that was the number I came up with. I thought of this and I thought, well, I wonder what it is. And wow. So I just don't see shrinkage and cutting. I just don't think that. And if anything, if we're going to bring on the 80% of the world who don't live the energy rich life that the Western world lives, we're talking about not shrinking the energy footprint of the world, but doubling, tripling, quadrupling. There's a clip in Pandora's Promise where Michael Schellenberger describes what's going to happen as the rest of the world sort of catches up with the energy use of the Western world, and that's already happening in China. They're not caught up yet to our per capita use of energy, but it's we're just going to see the world's energy demands grow and grow and grow, and that solution for increasing the energy footprint has to be without fossil fuels because of the climate change, global warming consequences.
So Terry, is this what the term you used in the article of decoupling? Is this what you just described?
So in I'm not sure what so decoupling in my mind is increased use of energy, but uncoupled from the impact on the environment.
Yeah, so that's consistent with you're saying that shrinkage of usage is maybe a good thing, but it's in the broader scale is not going to be realistic. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, well, especially if we're going to allow, Africa to come on board and have the energy footprint that per capita that we have. And I think my view is that we must do that politically and economically and socially. That we can't.
So shrinkage of our excess of use is a good thing to do, but in the broader sense of getting up the developing countries, the total global picture is not going to be shrinking.
Right. I mean, the United States. Let's say we're at 300, I think, gigajoules per person, if you want to put a number in it. Europe and the cusp of developed countries are in the 150 range. So we in Canada and the United States could cut back our energy use and still maintain a fully developed nation lifestyle. But to bring the rest of the world up to that level, completely swamps out any cuts that the West might.
Okay. All right, good. Let's move on. David Singer, good to see you. And I know that you weren't shoveling snow this morning.
No, hardly. Terry, I found your article optimistic in coming up with technological solutions for what I see as primarily a political dilemma. It seems that everywhere we turn, there's politics in the way. But this is a detail. You slipped in, or it seemed like you slipped in, feedlots as a solution, partial solution for agricultural needs. And I think that is a very poor solution. Yeah. First of all, for methane reasons and the treatment of animals and all kinds of issues.
Good question. I had that too.
Yeah, I mostly there was reciting the agendas of the Eco-Modernists. I'm not sure I have much to say about that. I mean, what I think is kind of interesting technology is the animalless meat. Not necessarily vegetarian, but artificial meat in high tech environments using tissue culture and things like that. I mean, that's something that's way out there, but we can grow our steaks and hamburger without a live animal present and meet the needs there. But I think the point the Eco-Modernists make and the Breakthrough Institute and the like are that again it's a question of concentration and that we can manage this. I mean, again, it's not happening today, but the question of humane treatment of animals is a separate issue. But the ability to have a smaller footprint in our energy use and enables the capture of methane, say, as waste is kind of the way that that direction makes some sense.
Okay.
And it becomes a more high-tech kind of solution.
Okay. It's an interesting point. I do like Impossible burgers, but I haven't seen a good Impossible steak yet. Anyway, second round here. Bob, you have some more comments here?
Yeah, just since people asked about thorium-232, that's used for breeding uranium-233. So it's a breeder reactor. It doesn't free you from fission. All right, that's the first point. And the second point is that Terry is absolutely right. The economies of scale that you can get from small reactors is one that's attractive, and also more possibilities for what they call passive cooling. And so those are good features about it. But I go back to my original point. Be careful, don't overpromise. And as Christians, let us be humble in what we present.
Okay. Fair enough, Bob. Thank you. And here we have Kirk, or is it Sabina this time? Yeah.
It is Sabina. Hello.
Great.
So, Terry, you mentioned Africa a couple of times, so I'm saying Africa. My question is, can Africa and the third world afford to create nuclear energy? I assume it's quite expensive to build plants. How can these be made accessible? And also, are countries there and elsewhere in the third world open to nuclear energy?
So I think just from a political economic standpoint, the Chinese are moving into that space, whether we like it or not. But you know, it really has to do with. I mean, here's the story. You know, we talk about the you know, possibility of solar energy being solutions for these low income and you know, low technology environments. And you know, the response to that, again, these just may be stories I've heard, but you know, we want real energy is often the response. I don't want just a light bulb. I want to be able to run a refrigerator. I want to, you know, I want to be able to do the things that people are doing in the cities in the West. So you know, what the price tag of that is, and how that happens, and you know, can it happen? I think those are interesting and important economic questions. But I think if we want to see the kind of development that we think is important for human well-being, I think we're going to have to move in a higher energy rich Africa and other parts of the world where we don't have high energy. So I don't know that answers your question. I don't know that how do you do an end run around the economics of a high energy. You know, it doesn't even matter that it's nuclear. Any kind of high energy grid electricity, or even renewable solutions cost money, and so but it seems to me that's the direction and the pattern of things that we're wanting, for the sake of human well-being, more and more of that energy access.
In other words, you're saying that the nuclear power option is one that we may have to figure out how to make it affordable if they want to grow in their development to the extent to which they aspire. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Sabina. Bob M., I don't recognize your face. Would you mind sharing your last name?
My name is Bob McCamus. I'm a first-time participant.
Glad to have you here.
From Western Canada. Just a
Excellent.
comment on small reactors, small modular reactors. Canada especially is looking at an application for SMRs to power remote, especially in Canada, northern communities like First Nations, isolated mines, maybe military bases. where the current method of generating power is through diesel generators, and the diesel comes in on winter ice roads, which are becoming very economic and impossible due to the climate changes. So that is a scalable power source for remote communities. And there's also possibilities of using waste heat to grow tomatoes and lettuce for your salad. So it has great attraction for isolated communities.
Uh-huh. Okay. So what's the status of that, Bob? Is it going well, proceeding at an adequate pace, in your opinion?
Yes, there are several companies in Canada that are proceeding through the licensing applications to build prototype reactors. And my own community in Western Canada is putting in a proposal. It's a semi-isolated community, and we are asking to be a prototype not only for the reactor, but for the devoted power of our community through an SMR to show the full cycle of this development.
Interesting. That sounds encouraging. Pretty soon, Bob Geddes will lead us in a round of O Canada this rate. Okay. Robert Hayes. Okay, good to have you with us, Robert. Yeah, okay. There you are.
Yeah, so I'm actually an associate professor of nuclear engineering at North Carolina State University. So this is kind of my bailiwick and what I do research and teaching in. And you had asked those people that knew about small modular reactors to raise their hand. So I went ahead and did that. The issue there, why this new technology is so attractive, is that by having either new fuel and or new moderator technologies, the issue that has historically caused accidents is when you lose coolant. These new technologies allow you to just completely remove the coolant and it just heats up. The issue previously was that you would get a phase change, like with Chernobyl, the water flashed to steam, like a boiler explosion. And so by eliminating the potential, so all the heat that you have there from the fission, that can just be passively absorbed in either the new fuel or the new moderator. So you don't get a phase change. And what that does is that if you do lose coolant, you do have the worst case thing that could possibly happen. Everything goes away. Nothing is being controlled at all. It just gets really, really hot. And then the offsite release is sufficiently small that you don't have to evacuate anybody. So that's just huge, right? The issue with Fukushima was the evacuation. The radioactivity was insufficient to produce any measurable medical effects. But even at these low doses, they still ask for evacuation and will demand it. We do that here in the United States at doses that are comparable to what you can get legal doses for a radiation worker. The EPA would issue evacuation orders. It's just a very conservative approach. But the point is you don't even go there with these new small modular reactors if you're using the latest technology and materials and design. So it's pretty exciting stuff.
Thank you. That adds some optimism to the point. Tal van der Graaf again. Another comment from you? Yeah, let's unmute you. We need to be unmuted here.
All right, here we go.
Okay.
Good, thank you. A few comments about the small modular reactor. And Bob M. Lives a couple of blocks down from me.
Okay, good.
I'm glad to see that he made it today. After shoveling his driveway, I did mine is warming up. There are some other advantages to an SMR, especially in remote communities, is that the waste heat can be used for high-intensity gardening. For example, rather than using a greenhouse, you can grow all the food you need locally, and the shipping cost of fresh produce is out of sight in to go to northern communities. So there are many advantages. For example, you can also heat water up to whatever is needed to raise fish. And but the plants is in particular very important. What I see as some of the downsides to an SMR is with all these new technologies, the question is, what do you do with the waste afterwards? We have a good track record now with light water reactors, what to do with the fuel afterwards. But if you have an SMR, especially, for example, the molten salt one, you have to find a way to reprocess that. And I think that has to be looked at as well. So well, on the one hand, I recommend and I really agree with the SMRs. On the second hand, it's always a matter of these things look so good on paper. In reality, we have to make sure that we know exactly what the end point of that is. What do we do with the waste afterwards? And so I think I recommend it. I think it's great to have SMRs, but we have to work our way through with disposal of it and reprocessing afterwards.
That's great. That's a good dose of humility that Paul was asking for.
Yeah,
and realism.
With that, I will lower my hand again.
All right. Thank you very much, and we look forward to that part of the country of Canada leading the way here. That's great. Jack, good to see you with us. How about a comment from you? No, you got to unmute yourself, Jack. I'm sorry.
I got to finish chewing my radish. I was. It's lunchtime here in California.
Yeah. So that's not a sunset behind you.
That's a sunset at my wife's wheat farm in eastern Washington with wind turbines. Pacific Corp has a wind farm that leases land from her. The wind.
Oh yeah, I see it.
The wind earns more than the wheat does. At least these days, because they came back and extended the length of the turbine blades by some 20 feet each. It's not low enough that it'll hit your head if you walk by, but it's pretty close. So I'm in my latest pursuit is hydrogen from renewables, as hydrogen is an energy source. It's not a good carrier, but it's a good source, except for the problem of storage. I'm going to say something just for the sake of completeness, going back to Terry's comment that he's not persuaded that we can return to pastoralism. And that's certainly my point as well, having trained and served as an engineer. But we have to re-engineer our society, not just to create more sources of energy, but to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that we are currently emitting. We have to do both, or we won't get there. We won't get to the place we're going. And so alternative fuels, alternative sources are as important as engineering new sources that are green. This has led me into transportation as a major source of greenhouse gases emissions in the U.S. and in the world. In the nation, it's like 40%, and in our state, it's 50%, and in our county, it's 2/3 of all greenhouse gases come from roadway transportation. Electric vehicles are a step, but their energy isn't green until we make it green. And so now what? Well, trying to work on commuter rail to get people out of their private vehicles and onto public transportation and bicycles is a big part of my current focus. And that has led me to everybody in every organization who's willing to be an ally in that cause, which has led me then to a group that calls themselves SoCo-CAN, Sonoma County Climate Activation Activist Network. Well, they say and repeat to themselves that the problem is capitalism. Capitalism is incapable of solving the problem of climate change. And you still saw that in the European meeting recently. They can't come to conclusions. We are incapable of making those tough decisions. That gives me pain because I taught a course, an elective course in engineering called, I called it Green Design and Manufacturing. In fact, it was the old industrial ecology concept, which was biomimicry or cyclic production of, or use of energy and materials. So I'm saying we can save capitalism if we have the will to change it, to make it sustainable and circular. Our economy is circular in materials and energy. But there's a growing and vociferous and vocal minority who's saying capitalism cannot be cured. It has to be replaced with a culture and a form of economy that, in fact, will address these tough questions. It pains me to hear them, and I occasionally send a written rebuttal, but that's what's going on in my neck of the woods. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. I think, given that we have a hard stop in a few minutes here, I think we'll have that be the last question, except for mine. I always get last one if I do it, but I do want to give Terry the last word. And I wanted to ask you, Terry, if you might just comment in closing a little bit on the last page or two of your article, because in one sense, the discussion we've had here for this past hour and a half probably would be identical to a Christian audience as well as to an atheist audience. No distinction. There's a lot we could discuss here. We only have about 4 or 5 minutes. What does Christianity uniquely bring to the table here? I mean, I know Christians are often viewed as more of a hindrance rather than a help in this whole business. But we also know that there are a lot of people working positively. But is there something unique that Christianity brings to the table on this?
Well, as you point out, there are lots of flavors of Christianity, and the ASA. I'm an advocate for a big tent ASA that embraces a variety of perspectives, and as I think the article suggests, think that the development of culture and industry is a part of what it means to be human and in the image of God, and as those who promote God's causes and purposes in the world, and invite us to make common cause with secularists or unbelievers who share that. So that that's my perspective on what it means to be human, and what the kingdom of God is like, and where we're heading. And while I don't want to say technology promises the kingdom of God, I think the way I sense and perceive a little bit from Ecomodernists and other advocates, I do generally have a pro-science, pro-technology embrace that reflects Christianity and our calling in the world. Again, we've got this sin problem that, a lot of our energies as Christians is devoted to and in response to. But I think that the general, subduing the earth, building culture, developing the world God created, that's still part of our task as believers and as in the kingdom of God. And I joke with my pastor friends that they're going to be out of a job when the Lord comes again, and the scientists of the world are going to be continuing to work on studying God's world and building culture and technology. I don't want to be overly dogmatic about that.
Yeah.
But that's kind of a Christian perspective, and I know there are other strands of Christianity that maybe are much more pessimistic about the long-term prospects of culture and science and whatnot. But in my tradition, we fully embrace embrace that.
Right. Okay. So, hey, as a Christian community, we've solved the problem of sin, right? So we can move on. Okay. So, at any rate, Terry, I want to really thank you for writing this insightful article, and to Jim Peterson for publishing it. I think it's been a big help, and I want to thank all of you for showing up, for many of you for your comments, and hope we can continue this kind of dialogue. And I'd like to invite all of you back on February 12th, and we'll talk about some of Elaine Eklund's work. Thank you very much, and goodbye.